Daniel is going to be our character this morning. We'll start out with the fact that he was under the microscope big time. And I think it's probably a common experience. We've all had that critic or set of critics somewhere in the course of our life that was just looking for anything they could find wrong, and they would look for the smallest jot or tittle so they could pick on us and make us have a difficult time, is the way I think I'll say that. The difference is Daniel's critics were deadly serious. And when I mean deadly, I mean absolutely. They were seeking to remove him from the planet. They didn't want to just get him out of the picture. They wanted him dead. You and I, our critics, probably just wanted us to move on to a different career path somewhere else and just be out of their life. But it's no fun either way you look at it. It's always difficult and it just complicated. So Daniel is a guy, as it says here, has an extraordinary spirit. Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. And the king intended to appoint him over the entire kingdom. But of course, all these other people got jealous. They didn't like it. There was a lot of plotting and vying for position and trying to climb the ladder. It was the normal political scene that you and I imagine today carries on up at Washington and all of that stuff, probably even local politics. People just trying to get ahead of someone else. And of course, in politics, to have someone like Daniel of an extraordinary spirit is a little unusual because a little unethical plane, I'll call it, is pretty common. So Daniel's secret to his success, and this will also be the secret to our success, is that he was consistently faithful. Whether we go back to his earliest days at the beginning of the story or we come down to his later days and his biggest trial, he's consistently faithful. And that is the trick. That is your spiritual hack. That's the way to get ahead. Figure out for you what it means in your life, because it's going to mean a little something different in your personal life than it did in Daniel's life. How can you be consistently faithful day in and day out, over and over and over, no matter what's going on around you? And that will be your secret to moving on up. So Daniel was humble, and he was focused on what was doing right, and he kept that. He never let go of that one particular thing. And that's what you and I want to be, consistent and never let go of it. So we'll bring in a New Testament verse, Revelation 2:10, be thou faithful unto death. That's the goal. Now, I understand none of us are going to bat 1,000 all the way through, and that's okay. Then we'll go back to 1 John 1 and verse 9, where he says, if we confess our trespasses, he's faithful and just to forgive us our trespasses. And when we do find ourselves caught up in a trespass, it's not just enough to go, okay, I messed up. I ain't going to do that again. We need to do an autopsy on it and go, okay, why did I mess up? We need to look deeper into what underlied that misstep and identify what went wrong at a deeper level. And if you can identify what went wrong at a deeper level, then you can cure that problem, which gives you greater assurance that the next time something similar comes up, there won't be a root problem under there giving you trouble. And you'll walk through it much easier than you did the first time. So Daniel is focused on pleasing God. That's his number one thing. That's everything about his life. He's got Ecclesiastes 12:13 down solid. The whole duty of man is to fear God and keep his commandments. Daniel's got that going on. And he understood that it's all in the little acts of life, because most of life is nothing but a series of little redundant, boring, mundane activities. And that's not wrong. That's a blessing. Sharon and I were having that little conversation about that point on the way over here from the house. And I said, man, just think, you got these people that really, really, really climb the ladder, and they can't even live a normal life. They really can't. They can't just go out and about like you and I can because they got the paparazzi after them, they got fans after them, and everything is just, a whole different world than you and I can imagine. The ordinary, mundane, repetitive, routine life you and I live is envied by people who cannot live that life. Isn't that a little bit ironic? We wonder what it'd be like to be the king, and the king's wondering what it'd be like to be a common person. We have blessings right here. When I talk about the mundaneness of life, I really need to word that in a way that doesn't make it sound negative, because it is not negative. You won't get a greater blessing in life than the simple blessings that we so easily take for granted. Those are really, that's the pinnacle. That's the awesomeness. So the garden analogy is, there are a couple of big events in a garden. When you first till it up, that's a pretty big event, I guess. So there's some great prep. And then you plant each seed somehow or another. It's got to get in the ground. Well, that's not really just a major event, but it is a necessary event, right? If you want something to grow, you got to plant a seedling or something. Something's got to go on the ground. And then you get all of that set up. You get all your seeds in. You get your little signs poked in the ground so you remember what you planted where. And then you wait. But no, you don't wait. Then you come out and you water every day, right? And then you watch for the weeds and you take the weeds out. And then you might have to put up a scarecrow to keep the birds out. You've got different things you do. But as you look at each one of those things, as you're between the point of putting the seed in the ground and you're to the point of getting to pick those tomatoes off the vine or whatever it is you planted, all of the stuff in between is repetitive, routine, and mundane. And all of it is absolutely necessary. And all of it, no matter how small you rate it, is absolutely essential to the success of your garden. And that's the way life is. We do those repetitive, little, mundane things. And I'm going to tell you that's what Daniel did. The thing is, what we get in the book of Daniel is we get the highlights. We get the big part, right? We get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We get Daniel in the lion's den and all of those things. And we go, wow, that's awesome. And it is awesome. You are totally right to be impressed by it. But what happened all the years before and all the years in between? It was like keeping your garden. Somewhere back in their past, let's suppose their youth, it's kind of suggested there in chapter 1, they planted the right seed. And they cared for it, and they cared for it, and they cared for it, and it grew and it grew. And when it was time to pick the fruit, Daniel in the lion's den, for example, it was ready to be picked. And that's another big moment, right? So you have the faithfulness of little things. And those little things just add up. And it's so easy to explain. Just do it. It's a little hard to implement. It's a little hard to see because the little things we're talking about, for example, to make a happy marriage over 50, 60 years, however long you happen to get, is most of it is going to be picking up your socks. Remember to pick up that loaf of bread or that gallon of milk on the way home from work because your wife asked you to. It's going to be those things. And for us men, it's going to be things like, oh, remember this is our anniversary. Or it's your birthday. None of those are major events. But all of the little things, that's just like planting the right seeds, watering the garden, and taking care of it. And the shortcut people are going to envy your progress. The people who are looking for shortcuts and think there ought to be an easy way to do it, it's like, I ought to be able to plant my seed today and tomorrow enjoy the harvest. Those people who think there is some way around it, it's kind of funny when you put it in the analogy of a garden in it. Because in the analogy of a garden, it is absolutely impossible to plant that, let's say, watermelon seed today and eat a big old juicy watermelon tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. But when we get away from the obvious and we get into the nebulous areas of life, people think, oh no, I know a shortcut. I'm going to make this work. I know how to do something nobody in all 6,000 years of recorded civilization have ever figured out to do. No, it's not going to happen. And the people who learned to do what Daniel did, Be consistently faithful, day in, day in, day out, year after year, year after year. Those people are going to rise. And the people who stayed down here looking for a shortcut are going to start going, well, he was just born lucky. He just got some lucky breaks. He was an overnight success. And you know what an overnight success? Anybody can be one. It just takes 10 to 20 years. And I always think that's a little revealing. That's good. So it takes the courage to press on with that consistency. And I have Philippians 4:13 there because Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I think we rightly so do look at that verse sometime and go, that means when I lose my mate, I can get through it with Christ. Amen. It does mean that. That means when I lose my mom or dad, I'll be able to get through that time with Christ. Yes, it does mean that. That means if I get cancer and the doctor says you have 6 months to live, I can get through that with Christ. Yes, it does mean that. But see, it doesn't mean just the big lined-in moments of life. It also means the little repetitive, mundane, nobody's looking, nobody really cares, but it's going to make a difference because if I don't water my garden, if I don't keep the weeds out, the weeds are going to take over, and if I don't water it, it's going to dry up and die. All of those things matter. And with Christ, I can do all of those little things day after day, week after week, year after year. And one day when the fruit is ready, I can enjoy the harvest. So my point here under Daniel focused on pleasing God is don't wait for the big things to go, okay, I'm going to shine now. You shine right now. Right now. You listen to this sermon the best you can listen right now, whatever your developmental stage is. When we sing that closing song, you sing the best song you can sing right now. Maybe you don't sing real good right now. Maybe you'll sing better in the future. Maybe you're like some of us and you're older and you ain't never going to sing better. That's all right. You sing the best you can sing right now. When you associate with one another, and all of this is pretty trivial association on the surface, but you do the best you can right now. And then when tomorrow comes, I want you to forget today. Today don't count anymore after it's tomorrow. Don't rest on your past accomplishments. The old timers used to say don't rest on your laurels. So don't rest on that. Now yesterday don't count no more. It's over. Today is the day. This is where we live. So 4 quick takeaways from the first point. I want you to commit to daily prayers, and I want you to do it plural prayers. And I put plural there because Daniel prayed not just once. Now, one prayer is good, but let's compare this just really quickly. Let's say you do one 30-minute prayer a day. Let's say it's in the morning. I think it'd be a good time, but you don't have to. And you don't pray again. But now let's take somebody else who wakes up when they're morning, they have a 1 or 2 minute prayer. And then around 10 o'clock, they have a 1 or 2 or 3 minute prayer. And around noon, they have a 1 or 2 minute prayer. And about 2 o'clock, they have another 1 or 2 minute prayer. About 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Which one do you think is going to stay more consistently focused on God? One long prayer, especially if it's check the box, got to get this prayer done so I can get out and live life. Uh-oh, we've got a problem there. I think 100 small prayers do you more benefit throughout the day than one long prayer, especially one long prayer at the end of the day. Now, I'm not against long prayers at all. Please don't misunderstand me. But you got to be committed to daily prayers. And I'll not prescribe how those are done. I know the brethren argue about that sometimes. But anytime you put God in the center of your mind, that's where you need to be. So we're going to honor God in every task, and I had to throw Colossians 3:23 in there. And whatever you do, do it heartily as for the Lord. So literally every task. And I want you to get down pretty minimal again. And I know it's going to sound trite, but this is where life really happens. When you pick up something after yourself. When you leave the restaurant, pick up your trash. At least put it on the tray. So when the waiter comes to clean the table, it's a little easier to pick up instead of strode all over the place. Just little things. Spill a little coffee on the counter? Well, I got a wife, she'll take care of that. No, wipe it up. You just brushed your teeth, you got toothpaste in the sink, rinse it out. Now, I know a lot of people don't think about that, but one little story that sticks in my mind from long ago, this couple ended up divorced. Prior to the divorce, one of her complaints was, every time after he shaves, I got to go in and wash his whiskers out of the sink. How long does it take to wash your whiskers out of the sink? 5 seconds? I'm saying it's the little things. Whatever you do, see the deeper value in it. Then practice gratitude no matter how small it is. Learn to be grateful. That's a wonderful rule. And then practice the golden rule. You do good unto others. We never read of Daniel being vengeful. Interesting, isn't it? The foundation of integrity. He was consistent under pressure. Anybody can be consistent when everything's going smooth, but in his case, the integrity was him. It was in his heart. It was his passion, his thing. Anybody can be consistent when everything, all the circumstances are lined up, and it's really going to be easy to be consistent. He was consistent when it wasn't easy. And that's one of the tricks. They couldn't find anything. Let me just read it. They could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption because he was faithful. They looked for everything they could. They scrutinized him. They had him under the microscope. They could find nothing. They eventually had to come up with a whole new plan, and that is make it illegal to pray to anyone but the king for 30 days because they couldn't find anything wrong with it. Proverbs 10:9 says, he who walks in integrity walks securely, but he who perverts his way will be found out. We should expand on this just a tad. We'll do it a little bit later, because when we say walk securely, we're talking about eternal security, not always your physical security. So Daniel had his conviction, and that's what you've got to have. You've got to have an inner conviction about you and your self-identity and your self-respect, and you will not do something that's inconsistent with faithfulness, and it has nothing to do with what other people are thinking. You have this whole issue wrapped up in your own self-respect and your self-esteem and your relationship with God. And if other people come into the picture, and they do down the list, then that's okay. But I'm worried about other people, about whether or not I will be walking in integrity or not. That's the attitude that you want. It's a conviction that's wrapped up in your own self-identity, and you will not be untrue to yourself or untrue to God. I don't care if 1,000 people are watching or no one on earth will ever know. It's got nothing to do with it. I'll know. And God will know. And that's the two people that really count. So Daniel was willing to pay the price. He wasn't going to take shortcuts. He wasn't going to build a house of cards, so to speak. He was going to press on in integrity. So, quick takeaways from integrity. You got to self-examine. You got to identify your weak areas. If I'm going to fall, where am I? And we all have our own place, right? Where are we individually likely to fall? Then you're going to renew that commitment daily. I've already hinted at this, but let's say it again. Look, yesterday's over. It's done. You get your New Year's resolution. It's January the 1st. It's like, woohoo, I got this. Well, anybody's got it for January the 1st. Now it's January the 2nd. Well, forget January the 1st. In your mind, go, it's January the 1st. What does the saying say? Today is the first day of the rest of your life. It's always January the 1st. And if I can really get the energy of what I'm saying there, then I'm going to renew my commitment every day. And then we're going to embrace accountability. And primarily, I would like that to be accountability to self. But since we all need another set of eyes involved in our life, we want some other people involved. So that's always helped the church family and what have you there. And then we want to grow deeper roots into God's Word. And if you're in the God's Word and you've been solid in God's Word, then I got one question. This is for me and for anybody else. Can you go deeper? Well, I think I can. Okay, let's go deeper. That's the only thing. I want to keep going deeper. I want those roots to go deeper and deeper. And then pray for wisdom and specific needs. James says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. But then he says in verse 5, pray for wisdom. So I'm going to give you 2 ways to pray here. Pray for wisdom in a general sense. I have no problem with kind of a blanket, Lord, give me wisdom. I don't know what's coming today, but I'm going to need some wisdom. And then when you hit those specific spots, pray for wisdom right there in that specific need, whatever that specific need is. In our Bible class, we're going to talk about impatience. So maybe your specific need is to learn patience. I like the joke that says don't pray for patience. It's going to be a rough year if you do, because the only way to learn patience is to encounter situations that require patience, which is going to challenge your impatience, right? That's the way it works. So you may pray very specifically for wisdom to help you with your patience. Get specific in that request for wisdom. Then Daniel had his test, 6:10. Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now his roof chamber had a window open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, multiple prayers, did you catch that? Praying and giving thanks before his God as he had been doing previously. So he's up against it. He could rationalize. We could all rationalize this. Look, I'll just pray in private for 30 days. Gotta understand. Or I'll just put this on hold for 30 days. Better to live to fight another day than to die on this particular hill. There's 1,000 ways to rationalize it. He didn't do that. He said, no, this is what I do. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave it in the hands of God. And you're going to be tested. It is inevitable that you will be tested. That is what life does to us. But Daniel had it because he had already trained. He had been training. He had been watering his garden and pulling the weeds and caring for the plants year after year after year in those mundane, repetitive activities. And now he was ready. The fruit was ready. And when it was tested, we saw what his garden had grown. Because the test does not create your character. The test tells us how you have trained. The test shows us what you have been doing. And when you see somebody hit with a big test and they get through it, you go, they've been doing it right, hadn't you? And you see somebody crumble, you go, yeah, then you go back and get some more training, don't they? Daniel, in the test, proved his surrender to God. We'll open that up a tad more in a moment. His confidence was anchored in God, not the king. Remember, the king couldn't do anything about it. According to the way the law was set up, once he signed that law, it couldn't be changed. He couldn't change it. He couldn't find a way to change it. His confidence wasn't in other people. It was solely in God. And then he was tested, and others noticed. We'll open that up a little bit more here. The king proclaimed, he delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven on earth, who has also rescued Daniel from the power of the lion's den. This just wasn't an episode for Daniel alone. I would say Daniel was the primary player here. But the king made a proclamation, and the proclamation was known to everyone under the king's authority. Daniel's example wasn't just for Daniel. It was for the entire kingdom. So 5 quick takeaways here. Learn again to anchor real deep in God, because that's where you want your anchor to be. Always choose your conviction over convenience. That's the only way to stay consistent. Ponder the training process and they go, what's really going on here? What could God be doing beyond just what I'm going through? Who else could he be affecting through what I'm doing and how I go through it? You don't do it all alone. It is with God. Philippians 4:13. I should have stuck that up there. And then again, consider how your example might influence others, because your example does influence others one way or the other. So God's with Daniel. He said, my angel, my God, sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me. That's neat. That's the answer we want. We don't always get that answer, do we? Sometimes God lets us go through a struggle a little different more. In Psalms 23:4, we say, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Isn't that real easy to say when we're sitting in a fairly comfortable auditorium and you know the sermon's going to be over in about 5 more minutes? It's a whole other ball game when you're right in the middle of it. And it's all out of your control. Daniel was in that place where there's nothing he can do. There's nothing the king can do. You just got to put it off in God's hands and go, okay, it's all in your hands. And he can be delivered through life or through death. And the reference in Acts 7 is Stephen's stoning. The point we need to get through our heads is that sometimes God's answer is, no, it's time for you to come home. It's appointed when a man wants to die. So I know I got to go home sometime. Now, I don't want to go home in my mind until I get between 70 and 80 years old, right? Because the psalmist in Psalms 90 and 10, I believe that is, he said what? About the length of life? It's 70 years. If by reason of strength, it might be 80. And so, you kind of like that. But a lot of us like the idea, I'm going to live to be 100. Okay. But we don't get to pick that one. We can set the stage for it to happen a little bit, but we don't get to pick that one. And so we may be delivered through life, like Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or we may be delivered through death. And if you cannot understand that delivery through death, and it is a tough concept, then you know you're still too anchored in the flesh. And you need to work on that aspect of it. Hebrews 13:5, he said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever abandon you. That's the promise we have from God. So, 4 quick takeaways. Again, prayer. Prayer is consistent. It weaves through everything. Daniel did it 3 times a day. Trust whatever God does will be right. Now, that's a little bit tricky because I'm just like you. I got what I want God to do. I got my plan. I got my idea of how it ought to go. But what if God says, no, I have a different plan? Now we have to find the faith that says, okay, whatever God does, it will be right. We're going to look beyond ourselves because we can't control as much as we'd like to think we can. And we're going to ponder, how's God working behind the scenes? What is God doing behind the scenes? And then we have God's victory. Daniel's test set this huge stage. And I don't mean just for his day and the people under the king's authority of that day. I mean a multi-generational stage that goes over all time. Our test served multiple purposes. Now, I would say primarily they're for our training, but also there's this light that shines out to other people and shows us what the human man, human woman is capable of. And here's Daniel's light. I didn't do my math on this. I know we're 2,000 years back to Christ. We're probably another 1,000-ish years back to Daniel, maybe not quite another 1,000 years. We're roughly 2,500, 2,700 years back to the day of Daniel. And what story do we still teach our kids? How many of you learned the story of Daniel in the lion's den before you can remember? If you were raised in a typical Christian home back when, that's one of the things we learned. And now as grandparents, what story do we teach our kids when they're little and say, read me a story? When we pull out our Bible story book, this is one of them we read. When I say God set a bigger stage, or Daniel set a bigger stage, I'm talking you and I are on that stage. Look at what God had planned there. Now, I understand what you and I go through is going to be on a smaller scale. I get that. That's fine. I don't know I want to be on the scale Daniel was on, but there's more going on. And God has a bigger victory than just the one individual. And we get to participate in that bigger whatever when we act faithful. And then we're going to let other people know about it. When God gives you a victory, talk about it. Now that may sound a little awkward, but I'm going to go to Psalms 40, verse 9 and 10, where David said, I proclaimed good news of righteousness in the great congregation. Behold, I will not restrain my lips. Lord, you know. I have not hidden your righteousness within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your mercy and your truth from the great congregation. You let things be known. You let things be known. I was going through a bad time. I was going down a bad road. And here's how God helped me and intervened and worked into my life. You share it with other people. I think people are kind of hungry for those stories. So this is our next to the last slides. We've got 8 quick takeaways. This is really the whole lesson kind of condensed. Faithfulness matters. I don't care how small or great. Don't look just at great ones. I really like you to focus on all the small stuff, and the great stuff will take care of itself with that training. Integrity is going to be your foundation, whether public or private. I'm going to emphasize the private. Nobody's looking. No one will ever know. I did X, Y, or Z. You fill in the blank. That's a big test. When you're all by yourself and nobody's looking, that's your lion's den, if you would. Number 3, God's going to reward faithfulness. You can count on it. That's going to be in heaven primarily, but count on it. Courage and conviction are going to work together. Really get that conviction, and you'll find your courage. Prayer, vital at every step. I should have put an S on that just for fun. Multiple prayers. Our light shines brightest in the darkness, and it really does. That's where people really notice. Look, when your life's going smooth and everything's great, we look at it and go, hey, that's cool. It's not that impressive. You don't have any problems. You don't have challenges. Okay. And you're going through a hard time, and you're acting in a way that's demonstrative of your faith and your consistency. People take notice of that. Trials are going to do more than we know. So you want to embrace the trials. And finally, trials deepen your surrender to God. I would say to you that Daniel's night in the lion's den, it was a victory. It was a victory over Daniel's enemies. It was a victory for the king, and it was a victory for Daniel. Let me ask you this. After Daniel's night in the lion's den, how would you ever shake his faith in God again? It deepened his surrender to God. It deepened his connection to God. And when trials are traversed wisely, that's exactly what they do. They deepen our surrender, our confidence, our conviction, our consistency, our walk with God. And so we have our last frame, integrity. And it shines brightest in the darkest time. The only way I know that we can really, really shine bright is to do it in the darkness. And the irony is, I don't want to do it that way. I know, I don't either. But that's the way we do it. So let me close. I don't know how to work the song title in there really smooth, so I'm not going to do that. Are you shining? Are you being consistently faithful in the little things, even when nobody's watching? That's the real lion's den for you and me. If you are, you stay the course and you give yourself a pat on the back. If you're not, then say, I need to do some more training and re-engage your training with the determination to do better in the future. If you're subject to our public invitation, our baptistry is ready. Let us help. I stand and say.